The title is maybe a little bit misleading because what we're going to focus on today is actually writing QML. But let me start. A little bit about me first. My name is Bache-Wiig. I am a developer at Nokia Qt Development Frameworks in Oslo, and I've been working there for 5 years. And I've been involved in look and feel things. I'm responsible for the GTK integration we have. I have been working a bit on Qt Creator. And more recently, I am fully involved in working on Qt components and QML and Qt Quick. So I really think this is the way forward within user interface design. But the person that really triggered this talk that asked me to do it was Nigel Haitella, who's a user interface expert at Nokia. And he just really wanted to emphasize that it's possible to use Qt Quick for things that you would use other tools for today. And I'm just going to demonstrate how you can easily use Qt Quick to make a fully working prototype running on your phone. So let me start. First of all, the sales pitch. I'm sure most of you have already been to Qt Quick lectures today, so I'm going to do this quick. Qt Quick is a new way to create Qt UIs. It's based on a declarative language, which means you have to reset your mindset a bit if you're a developer, because you have to think differently about how you create your applications. It's based on JavaScript and HTML/CSS style syntax. And that means that if you're a web developer, you already have touched on a lot of the same technologies. If you're a Flash designer and you used ActionScript, you have already used the same language in many ways. So it's very easy to transfer existing knowledge over to QML. And also it has built-in support for states and transitions, which means it's very good language for just doing precisely interface prototypes, as I'll demonstrate today. So what's the traditional approach to interface design? Well, the first step everybody generally should do is to make a storyboard, and they tend to use pen and paper for the first part, where you just have a whiteboard, you put up pieces of paper with each screen, and then you will basically have some arrows showing how things move back and forwards, how the application is supposed to work in practice. And then the second step is generally that you give this storyboard to a designer, and he will create a beautiful Photoshop mockup for you. Of course, it's not a working interface. It's just a static picture showing what the application should look like. And then sometimes, this depends on your preference, sometimes you will actually involve other mockup tools like Adobe Flash, like there are a lot of mockup languages out there that allow you to easily make these things come alive. The problem with using those languages is that you won't be able to reuse those in the final design. So once you have done this, developers try to implement it. But what are the problems? Well, there is a long turnaround time from the time that your designer has delivered his design until he can actually see the final C++ prototype or the final C++ interface. And then he will usually realize that there are a lot of details that didn't quite work in the final design, because the designer was designing this thing without constraints. He was using an animation tool. He was using just an image editor where there are no boundaries. Whereas when you squeeze this into a widget-based design, you have to work within some boundaries. So the problem you have is that you get caught up in the details a bit too early. For instance, maybe there is a lot of pixel perfection going on in that Flash prototype that you simply cannot transfer to the C++ version, the final version of your application. And also developers tend to hate pixel perfection. I know this firsthand because I'm one of the few that actually care about pixel perfection. So you often give somebody a picture and you expect it to look at least remotely like the end result, and then you realize all the colors are off and all the pixels are slightly off, and then you have to ask him to fix all of those slight pixel errors afterwards. So this is very frustrating for designers that they can't just step into the C++ code and really do those fine small details themselves. So the end result is that it looks nothing like the designer intended, unless you go through the whole process again and really go back and iterate. So you lose a lot of time in this process. But if you use Qt Quick, your designers can actually create fully working apps. And it's basically because if you're a web designer, for instance, and a lot of designers out there already know JavaScript, they already know web technologies, it's very easy to get up and running with Qt Quick. And you can actually test on hardware. And that means that if you're just a web designer and you're responsible for making user interface, you can just drop that file you made on the phone and run it, and it will have the exact same performance characteristics as the final application, at least when it comes to your interface elements. So basically, you're forcing your designers to work within the boundaries of the hardware. So you can sort of guarantee that you know what the end result will look like. And of course, it has the same constraints. It prevents the designer from making impossible animations, stuff that just cannot be realized within reasonable limits. And of course, you can speak the same language, because if you send a QML file or just a piece of JavaScript to a designer, there's a much higher chance that he will be able to read that he will be able to make those small modifications, just those small pixel adjustments that you need in order to make your application really shine. So that's basically my sales pitch. In conclusion, I mean, you have the instant feedback fact. There is no compile. You just do a change and you run it on the phone. You don't have to compile it for the hardware. You don't have to do anything but transfer the file to your phone. I'm going to demonstrate this afterwards. It's incredibly fast on devices. It's unlike the other prototype languages. This has been designed from the ground up to be fast on phone hardware. And I think the last but maybe most important aspect, it's incredibly fun. And I hope I'll try to show a little bit of that awesomeness to you today. So let's get started. Let's start to create a prototype from scratch. And the first step, as I said, is to have a concept. My concept is not particularly original. You have seen this app before. It has shown up on every single mobile device. That's not really the point. But it's a very common concept. It's basically two screens. We're going to hook up to the Flickr search API. And Flickr, as most of you already know, is just an image hosting service online. It has photo feeds. You publish pictures there, and everybody else can see them, can comment on them, and such. So what we're going to do, we're going to make a photo stream directly from Flickr. We're going to have a list of pictures here. If the search string is empty, that's just going to be the latest pictures from Flickr. And if you search, for instance, for the word cat, then only pictures that have the keyword or tag cat in it will show up. And of course, if you click on either one of those, I want to view that image. So how can we do this using QML? Well, this is the result I got from my designer. In this particular case, I actually happened to design it myself, but that's sort of beside the point. This is a typical result you would get from a designer. It is usually made in either Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator or some other fancy artistic tool. It doesn't really matter, but because the process is more or less the same. I'm going to go a little bit back to it. But in this case, this was delivered as an SVG file, which means you need a vector graphics image editor. And how many here have Adobe Photoshop? OK, there's like 10% of you. So instead of actually basing my presentation on Photoshop, I'm going to use an open source application called Inkscape, which essentially, it's a vector graphics, so it's more like Illustrator. But just for the purpose of this app, I'm going to use that. So let's see how this looks inside this app. So this is what it looks like. And generally, what you will get is a layered file. I can go in here. I can inspect the layers. So each of these is a separate item. So the first thing you're going to do, you're going to have to slice up this into smaller pieces. I'm not going to show the entire process, but I'm going to show the first part. I'm going to show how you make a line edit component using QML. So let's get started. As you probably all know by now, this is Qt Creator. This is the main tool that you're going to be using if you're designing QML applications. So I'm going to create a new QML project. It's going to be a sorry, I'm using the Qt Creator 2.1 beta recently, so I'm a little bit fuzzy about where things have moved around. I'm going to create a QML application. And I'm going to place this here. I'm going to call my application picker. It doesn't matter that it exists. It's just because I already dumped some images there. So this is the basic QML application. You've probably seen this 3 times already today. But it's a good starting point. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make a standalone component, a reusable component that you can use as a line edit in your application. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new QML file. I'm going to call it line edit. It's added to my project, and it's now located in the same folder. Now, a line edit, I would say, if you look at the original images, you could say it's typically 180 pixels wide and 30 pixels tall. It doesn't really matter. And basically, we're going to have to use the artwork that the designer gave us. So I'm going to copy this line edit here, just to show it isolated. And if I now export this bitmap, because this is a vector graphics application, so you're going to have to export it as PNG files or as JPEG files in order to use it within QML. So if I now just dump this into the folder, and we'll call it line edits.png. Yeah. And just to make sure, I'm going to open the folder and check that it's there. Yeah, I dumped it wrong, so I'm just going to move this over in the image folder. So there you go. The line edit is there. I basically just extracted it directly from Inkscape, but it would be the same for Photoshop, for Illustrator, for all the other applications. So how do I use this in my app? It's very straightforward. You can start with an image, and you can use images, and it's called lineedit.png. So what does that look like? At the moment, it doesn't look like much at all. Thank you. There you go. So the problem we're having right now is that this doesn't stretch very well. When you create reusable components, you basically want to show them at more than one size. So the very easy thing you can do in QML is that you will want to preserve these borders when you scale it. As you can see, the borders are now very fuzzy because we are basically just zooming in on the bitmapped image. So the way you do that, you use a border image. And the border image has a border of 5 pixels on the left side. And you generally want to do the same thing on all the sides. So it's now a completely resizable, stretchable image. Now, the thing is, it's incredibly easy to make pre-made components because we have given you a few base components you can work with. And you don't have to implement all the logic of a line edit, of course. We have something called a text input for that purpose. So I'm going to anchor this to fill the parent. And that means that this text input is going to fill the entire rectangle of the parent component. So if I call my parent component line edit, and I call this input, and I run this, you can already use this as a normal line edit. So we basically just plug together the two components. I'm not quite happy with the aesthetics yet, so I'm going to do some final tweaks for that. Let's do a font.pixel size 20. Let's do a, whoa. See, it's a very advanced thing you can suddenly add here. I'm not going to do a blur on my line edit because, frankly, there is no reason. I'm going to do a anchors.margins 4, or actually 2, and see how that looks. So now we're pretty much where I want to be when it comes to this line edit. And the nice thing is, like, every single component you create is immediately accessible. So right now, this rectangle I have here, this Hello World application, I can just dump my line edit directly into it. And I'll position it some arbitrary way, and there you go. So that's how you can create a line edit with QML. It's extremely easy and very straightforward. There is one problem, though. If I want to access the text property of the line edit, it won't necessarily work. And the reason it won't work because a border image doesn't really have a text property. So the way we can do this is to forward the text property of the input to the border image. And then we use that using a property alias. So let's do a property alias text. And we bind that to input.text. So from the outside, if I now write text hello world, it's essentially the same as, okay, I can't spell, but that doesn't really matter. So it's essentially the same as writing on the as writing directly on the input field on the inside. So this is how you can make encapsulated widgets, and you can reuse them throughout your application. And of course, you're going to be able to build up, and you can download tons of pre-made components that already do this for you, including the Qt Components project that we are working on to standardize these things more. So that was the only pre-made component I'm planning on doing for this presentation. The rest of it we're just going to put in one big file, because quite frankly, it's very hard to follow my presentation if I'm going to jump between different files. So this is how you encapsulate something. So let's move over to the next step. I'm going to create the first screen of this application. And that's going to be a toolbar on top with a list view on the background. So we'll just quickly start by creating the toolbar. Before we do that, I'm going to give this a size of 360 times 500. That's not exactly the size of my N8, the device I'm going to prototype for, but it will fit better on the projector. So I'm going to call the root component, I'm going to call screen. And it's just like a square now. It's very awesome. And I'm going to start by creating a border image to place my toolbar. I will call this toolbar. And images toolbar.png. We look in the, thank you. It's cool. This is going to be some sort of recurring joke here. So if you look at here, I already sliced these other images. And if you look at the original one, there's actually not that many components that you need. It basically boils down to only a select few. And I added a spinner just for good measure, because it wasn't necessarily part of the prototype. I mean, you will easily find that you will have to augment whatever graphical assets you have with stuff you already have. So, okay, / awesome. The width of my toolbar is going to be same as the screen.width. And the height of my toolbar, I want to make 80 pixels. And since this is stretchable border image, again, I'm just going to make, I think 5 is a good number. It's going to work perfectly. And if I show this now, it's going to be a toolbar on top, but that's not what we want. We want this on bottom. And again, we can use anchors, just say anchors.bottom. The bottom of my toolbar shall be attached to screen.bottom. Now it's at the bottom of the screen. So I have my toolbar. And how can I place a line edit directly in the middle of this thing? It's incredibly simple. I'll just create a line edit inside the toolbar, and it's already there. I need to position this. So let me do a anchors.verticalCenter is the same as parent.verticalCenter. And anchors.horizontal, okay, actually, yeah. Horizontal center is the same as parent.horizontal center. So now it should be perfectly centered. But as you can see, because of the shadow in my pix map, I need to shift it down a few pixels. But you can easily adjust small things like that. And this is precisely the sort of pixel perfectionism that your designer is going to love you for. Vertical center offset, I'll just say I add 6 pixels, or say 4 pixels to push it down. And I think it looks a little bit more center now, actually 6 pixels. So it's very easy to just go in and reiterate. I mean, there is no compile in the process, and you now have a fully working line edit inside the toolbar. So next, we're going to have to create a list view, and we're going to have to create a delegate. Lists in QML works pretty much the same as they do in Qt. You have a model, which can be either a C++ model, it can be a mockup, just a normal list model that we create inside the document itself, or it can be fed from a number of other models that I'm going to show later in this presentation. But you also need to create a delegate. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a list view. And the width of my list view is going to be the same as the screen.width. The height of my list view is going to be the same as screen.height. And it's important that you never actually hard code these pixels later, because it makes it so much easier to resize your application. So you can really use these relative sizes to your advantage later. So right now there is absolutely nothing going on, because I haven't really created a model yet. There's a very simple way you can create a mockup model. Say I just want to have 20 items. And it will create a model with 20 items that are all empty of data. And I'll just use this temporarily before I replace it with something slightly more interesting. So the next thing I'm going to create a delegate that can present this data. And let's go and look at our mockup yet. The delegate I'm going to create is going to be these squarish button-like things. As you can see, you can almost not see it on the projector, but these have a button-like bevel, so it's intuitive that you can press them. And they also have a small arrow. And they, of course, have the image, and they have a title. So we're going to create that in our delegate. And since this thing shall be stretchable to several screen sizes, again, I'm going to use the border image. And if you look at our image folder, I already have this list image prepared. So let's see. It's going to be called delegate, or just list delegate. The source is going to be images and list.png. The width is going to be parent.width. The height is going to be 80 pixels. Again, these metrics I just take directly from the image itself. And again, we can try just using the default value of 5 for our borders, but there will be a problem that you quickly will see now. The problem is, of course, the border, I want to preserve the arrow so it's not stretched in an ugly way like that. So how can I do this? Well, if you look at the picture, you actually want to preserve this whole area, and that's roughly 60 pixels inside the picture. So if I just say the border right is going to be 60, I rerun my application, you will see it's no longer stretched the same way. Let's try 70. So there you go. That's how you can create these beautiful small arrows. And I can interact with it. There are 20 of these. So the next step now is I'm going to hook in some actual data. And as you said, my model is a placeholder. It's just 20 items. But what if I want to use some more interesting data to preview? I'm going to create a list model here. And it will have a list element. And inside the list element, there's going to be a title, first item, and there's going to be an image source, images jellyfish.png. And this jellyfish is, of course, this image that we have all over our mockup, because I basically lacked creativity. So this is our list element. And only one list element isn't particularly exciting. So I'm going to create a second and a third. So right now there's, and of course, I need to give this list model a name, so I'll just call it list model. No need to be original here. And instead of 20, I can point the list view to list model. So that is now the source of our data. And now, of course, there's only 3 items, but our delegate does not neither draw the image nor the text. So the next step here is to create an image element. And the data is directly exposed from the model into the delegate. So the delegate will have access to both title and image source properties directly. And of course, if this was a C++ model, it's exactly the same thing. You just expose your properties in the same way. So this can be any type of thing. It can be an abstract item model. It can be whatever you throw at it. So okay, I'm going to have source is going to be image source. Width is going to be 90 pixels. And height is going to be 90 pixels, because I just want the thumbnail to be square for now. So how does that look? So there's how we quickly just threw together this awesome little demo. I think I've scaled my image a little bit. 90, I think, is a little bit better. There you go. That looks beautiful. So okay, we just need to throw in a little bit of a text label there. Let me just give this ID my image, text, ID my label. And the text is going to be title. Again, we're just pointing to what our model throws at us. And how does that look? As you can see, the text is now actually on top of the image. You probably can't see it on the projector. But that's because I need to anchor it, like everything else. So I'm just going to anchor anchors.left. It's going to be my image.right. So it's now placed to the right of my image. Anchors.left margin is going to be 12 pixels to give it some spacing. How does that look? We're almost there, but since we are proper designers, we're going to have to want to make it a little bit more effort to make it look shiny. So vertical center is going to be parent.vertical center. That moves the text center. The font.pixel size I want to be 20. And now it looks almost beautiful. So there you go. That's how you can create a nice mock-up model with real data in it. And I'm just going to throw in a few more of these list elements so we can actually scroll up and down. Yeah, now we have a lot of third items here. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. Now, the next step here is to try to set up states. And if you look back at the original storyboard, the state you create in QML quite often corresponds to the state you have in your storyboard. And here there is typically two states. I have the initial state, which just shows the list view. That's this one. And I want to have a new view state. When you click on an image, I want to be able to see that image full screen. So that's our view state. So I'm just going to create these two states in QML, and I'm going to make it possible to move between them. So let's go back to our source code. And since the initial state is implicit, everything you define when you create the item is the initial state. So I only have to define one state here, and then you can swap between the initial state and whatever state properties I define now. So what do I want? I want the view state. That means I need to create this second screen. So far, I only have the toolbar and the first screen. So what is that? Well, it's very easy. I want to create an image. I'm going to call this view container, or give me a name, whatever. Okay, just view image. Awesome name. And the width is going to be screen.width. The height is going to be screen.height. And instead of anchoring this to the left of the previous item, we have a convenience for doing that, which is the row item. So if I wrap these two guys into a row, again, we only have two items in this row. And I'll call this view container. We have basically two views. This is the image view. Was that what I called it? I don't know. This is the image view, and this is the initial state page. So this is the list view. We are now wrapped them inside a container called view container. So what I'm going to do in this state transition is I'm going to shift the view container one screen to the right. It's quite straightforward. I'm going to say that in the state, the target is going to be view container, and the x-coordinate is going to be minus screen.width. Let's shift the entire container containing both the image and the list view one screen to the right. So let's see if this actually works. Now, to actually shift the state, I need to have a mouse area somewhere I can click on. And where is the logical place to put that? In this case, the delegates, because each delegate is designed to look like a button. And in order to make a button in QML, all you have to do is assign a mouse area to it. So I'm going to throw a mouse area inside my delegate, anchors.fill parent. By filling the mouse area to the parent means that the entire delegate's area becomes clickable. And on-clicked, and you can put any sort of JavaScript code inside here. This is just a handler for the click signal. So when I actually click on the mouse area, I want the screen.state to enter view state. So if I now open this and I click on an item, the whole thing disappeared. What actually happened was I shifted the list view one screen to the left. So just to make my little image a little more convincing, this is the view image. This is the one that's going to show the actual image results full screen. I'm going to give it a source for now. Images jellyfish.png. So this is just a placeholder for now. You can see it's actually there. We have just shifted it over. I want to make a pretty animation to do the state transition. So I'm going to add transitions. And I'm going to create a number animation with target. And the view container is the one that's going to be animated. The property is going to be the x value on screen, the one that makes it move linearly in the horizontal direction. The duration, I'm going to give it 600 milliseconds. And I'm going to add an easing curve, so we will have a very smooth transition. So easing curves are just like, instead of just having a linear, boring animation, you can add an easing curve to make it dampen, to make it feel like a physical, natural motion. And there's lots of easing curves you can use. So let me try one. Easing dot type. I want easing dot out cubic, for instance. This is just an example. And let's see how that works. I click it, you have a soft transition, and it looks beautiful. So how do I get back? Well, we already have in the mockup, we had some sort of back button. So I'm going to throw a back button onto my toolbar. So let's just go back to the toolbar. We have a line edit there, and now I want a back button, and that's going to be just an image. I'm not going to stretch the back button or do anything fancy. It's going to contain a mouse area, just like our delegate. It's going to fill our image for now. And on clicked, we're going to say we're going to say screen.state equals the initial state, which will roll back the changes we did to get into the view state. So that will take us back, so the x coordinate will be set back to the initial value you declared when you created it, which means, and I'm going to have to say, give it a source as well. Source is images/back.png. Again, we already split this image out into a separate PNG based on the SVG. And I'm going to have to position this. Right now, let's just see what it looks like. Now the back button is completely misplaced. It's right there. But if I click here and I click there, it takes me smoothly back to the original transition. So this looks beautiful. But let's just do a little bit of fiddling to make that centered. Anchors. Oh, sorry. Vertical center is parent.vertical center. Anchors.vertical center offset is 6. We have done this before, haven't we? Anchors.left is parent.left. And anchors.left margin is 12. That's a perfectly centered back button. And the question is, do I want to show the back button when I'm in this state? I mean, I guess I could show it, and then this would mean exit. But if I look at my original mockup, the idea was that we're only going to show the back button when we're in the view state, and we're only going to show the line edit when we're in the initial state. So again, this is very easy to achieve with QML. You just go in and say in the view state, oh, one more thing. I need to give my back button a name so I can refer to it later. So the back button is going to be having a opacity of 1, which means it's fully visible. And when I create the back button, it's going to have an opacity of 0, which means it's completely invisible. So this is, opacity is sort of this translucency. If you want to make translucent object, you can set it to 0.5, and it will be partially visible. So let me create that as 0 for now. And the line edit is going to be visible to begin with. But we also want, when we're in the view state, I want the line edit, which I probably didn't give a name. So again, you quickly see that you have to make these names on the fly. I'm going to call this line edit. And the opacity is going to be 0. So right now, if I do this, it's going to look a little bit jerky, but you can see it easily pops back and forth. So to smooth it, to ease it out, I'm going to do the same trick I did for the animation. I'm going to animate the opacity of the line edit, and I'm going to animate the opacity of the back button. So how does this look? You can now see that both the line edit and the back button easily, smoothly animates between the two states. So it's extremely easy to create these beautiful transitions between different states. So okay, arguably my mockup is done now, because you can already see how your app will function. It's very close to being a fully working prototype. There is one more thing I should do before I try it on the phone, though. When I gave it the fake data in the view state, I basically just hard-coded the image to jellyfish. This is the view image. It's the one you see in this view. So instead of hard-coding that image, I'm going to remove the source from here, and on-clicked, where we transition to the view state, I'm simply going to set image, we call it view image.source, is equal to image source. And just to remind you where I am now, I'm inside the delegate. So when I click my delegate, each delegate has an image attached to it. I'm just going to copy the URL of that image directly into the view image container. So if I actually use other pictures in my dummy data, for instance, I refer to list.png here, the second item, and I click this, you will copy list item here. So now it's actually very close to a fully working app. And this is one of the cool things about QML, because I have my phone here right now. And I think if I'm lucky, it will be connected and hooked up here. So there's the mass memory. So I'm just going to go to this folder. I'm going to copy my picker source code. I'm going to dump this onto my mass memory here. So when I copied the source code I just didn't do any modifications. It should be in talks picker here. And if we're lucky now, I'm going to switch over to use my phone. And this is a Nokia N8. It looks a bit crappy now because we don't use the HDMI output, but it actually has excellent HDMI out. It's just that the projector doesn't support it. So if I now go in here, sorry, I will go to demos, find the QML viewer, E:, I have a talks, picker, there's my file, I open this, and you have it on the phone. So really, and right now I can directly use this on the phone. And the first thing I realize now is that my back button's mouse area is so small that my thumb can't quite click it. It's very inconvenient. But I wouldn't actually have noticed this unless I tried it on the phone. So as you can see, this is beautifully animated, it's extremely smooth, and it just works straight out of the box. So, I'm not done yet. It will get better. I hope. So yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I find this incredibly cool. I have to say there's one side note though. We haven't released 4.7 for the N8 yet, so I'm using internal builds. But personally, I haven't found any problems with it, so I'm hoping we'll release those very, very soon. If you have other Symbian devices, you can already download 4.7 and install them directly right now. So, okay. Where was I? Yes. Let's go back to the slides. Thank you. So there you go. We have now achieved this thing. What's the next step we can do? Well, let's try see if we can actually make this a real application. How hard would that be? So, I'm using a fake delegate, or a fake model here, one I created myself. But it's only a very small step before we have a fully working application. So I'm going to demonstrate one of the coolest features I've seen in QML, and that's the XML List Model. The XML List Model is basically a XQuery-based model that can be used for parsing any type of XML. And if you're a web developer or have experience with web development, you know that most of the APIs out there for Flickr, for Twitter, and for all the popular web services out there are basically based around Atom or RSS feeds. So, for instance, if I want to access data directly from Flickr, I can use this URL directly. And you see it's api.flickr.com, services, feeds, photos, and I'm asking to get the data in the format RSS2. And I'm sending in the tags cars because I'm only interested in pictures that have been tagged with cars. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to run this in an actual web browser. This is what it will look like. Not very intelligible. If you show the source, it looks a little bit more intelligible. You can at least see it is an RSS feed. It has an XML namespace. I'm going to mention a little bit about that later. It has a channel. It has a title. It has several items. So I have simplified this a little bit to explain what it really looks like at the top level. You have the top typical XML header. Inside is a tag with RSS. Inside the RSS is a channel tag. And inside the channel tag, there is several items, one for each picture. And the first entry there is title. And of course, this is the data that we're going to stuff into our delegate. And the second one is the image, which is a thumbnail image. So let me see if I can just go back to the source code. And instead of this list model, I'm going to create an XML list model. And I'll just remove these dummy elements. So right now, the source for my XML list model is the web page. So I'm just going to take this string and dump it directly into my list model. And the last tag cars, of course, is just a placeholder. We want to do whatever you're typing into the line edit. So how can we do this? It's really incredibly easy, because instead of saying tags equals cars, I'm just going to say tags equals whatever line edit.text is. And since this is a URL, you want to escape this string. And this is a built-in function in JavaScript. So I'll just say escape line edit.text. Because if anybody adds things like percentages or file tags or just strange symbols that URLs can't parse, you want to escape those. So basically, that's our source. Right now, if I show it, you won't see anything. It's not particularly surprising, because we need to use XQuery, which is what the XML list model is based on, in order to ask for the particular tag. And you can think of XQuery as sort of SQL statements or SQL for databases. It's just the same principle applied on XML. It makes it very easy to ask for specific things. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to look up the documentation here, because we have some very similar examples. In this case, the query is, if you recognize the web page, RSS/channel/item. And if you look back at the documentation, it's only because that's the structure of our document. We are interested in items, which means they're inside RSS, inside channel. So if any tags named items are inside something that's called not within RSS channel, for instance, RSS some other name, then it will not be queried, or then it will not end up in the model. So this is just sort of isolating the specific tags that we're interested in. And at the level of item, we are interested in the title property. So again, actually, I can just get this directly from the help here, since we have a very similar use case. We're going to create an XML role. And the XML role we're interested in is title. I'm going to name it title because if you remember from the list elements I had in my list model, I just gave it the attribute title. So this is the name that will show up within my delegate. And of course, my text already queries for titles. And the query is title string. So we're looking for the element title of type string inside RSS channel item. And if I run this now, you see I actually have real data inside QML. It's really that simple. And what's the next step? We want to get the thumbnail. We want to get the actual image. And in this case, it's a little bit more fiddly because we're going to have to use a namespace. So you have to declare a namespace. I'm just going to use a pre-used, I showed you the example, so I'm just going to use a pre-made file for this. We need a namespace declaration and XML role. So namespaces are pretty much like C++ namespaces, and it will look like this. We have the image source here. The query is media thumbnail of type string, and we're asking for the URL property. If you go back to the document, it's because it's a URL property on the media tag. So yeah, that's just XQuery. And if I run this app now, what do we have? We have live actual data directly into our prototype. And the even cooler part here is if I type in cat, it's going to immediately, because we declare that the text is always hooked up to the line edit, it will know that it's supposed to refresh the model. So you have live edits, and it's just immediately updating this. I find this incredibly cool. And if I click on one of these, you expand them. Right now, this is a bit fiddly because what I see here is a very pixelated image, and that's only because if you look at the query, I'm asking for the thumbnail. And when I click on an image, let me just print out the source name. So I now print the source when I click on it. Thank you. I close my application, yes. Yeah, if you have, that's worth mentioning. If you run on Windows, you can only trace the debug output of one application at a time. So if you have more windows open, you'll get an error message. It's useful to know, especially if you're working on Windows. So let me see what that looks like. I click on an image. You will see that this is the URL that I get, and it ends with an _s. And this is actually documented in the Flickr API. If you have a URL of an image, you can easily translate it to different sizes, depending on just replacing that S with _m for a medium-sized image or _b for a large-sized image, a big image. So if I want this to look less pixelated, I will basically simply go back and I will say that the source is going to replace _s with _m. I click on an image, and it's now a higher resolution image. It's still not. It's still for mobile, but okay, yeah. I don't remember which one is the high resolution version. That's not it. Okay, let's just stick with medium resolution. Another thing we can do, of course, the image on the view image is to set the aspect ratio, because that looks a little bit strange. So let's just look at the documentation for image. You have this nice little built-in help for every component. So you just press F1, and you can see how you do the different things, because you can't really go and remember the API all the time. So you have fill mode, image, preserve, aspect fit. Let's try that. That looks like what we're looking for, what we want. And I now click on an image, and it now tries to preserve the aspect ratio. There is one more thing. Whenever you're loading something, you should always give feedback to user. If I was on a really slow web page right now, it would actually take time for those images to show up. And to do that, we want to add a little spinner animation. And again, I mean, you generally don't make everything from scratch. You generally have pre-made components. So again, I'm just going to go and find a pre-made component, which I have on my desktop. It's a spinner image. I'm going to create a new component in QML, Qt-QML file. I'll call it spinner image. And let's just look at it. It's very simple. It's an image. So it has the same API as an image, which means it will be a drop-in replacement for my existing images. In addition to that, I have a property loading, which is connected to whether or not the image has been loaded. And inside it, I create an image which refers to spinner.png. That's the little image I demonstrated. Let's see, where is my folder? That's this little image. And I'm adding a continuous number animation, which means this image will just simply keep rotating. So as long as the image is not loaded, I'm going to have a rotating spinner. So I mean, this is very simple. You can just copy and paste it, or you can just write it from scratch. I'm just saving a few minutes here. So let's go back to our application and replace the image with a spinner image. And let's go to our delegate, because even the thumbnails are gonna load slowly. And we replace this with a spinner image. And I run my application, and you can see it now spins when you load them. So actually, my application is pretty much done at this point. And if you want to see this application running on a phone, I guess I can demonstrate that right away. I mean, it's really simple. So let's just go back to the phone, mass memory, talks, and picker. I'll just copy my picker back to the phone. replace whatever files is there. Now, this is where things could bomb, of course. I'm going to have to make sure I'm online this time because I'm no longer working on just pre-filled list elements. So we're going to have to see if we can connect. Yeah, I'll switch it over in a second. I'm just going to connect it. There we go. Let's try again. Perfect. OK. Again. Oh, I don't want to make a call. XML viewer. Talks. Picker. Picker. And now I'm very excited. I'm just as excited as you are because I know the internet is going to be terribly slow on this thing. So I'll just let it sit there for a little while. Pray. There you go. See how those little loading animations go. And if you actually see it on the device, it looks much, much nicer than what you're seeing right now. Because it's running at 60 frames per second here. And if you actually, you can expand it. It works. So there you go. I have created a fully working app in 1 hour from scratch using QML. And so just to wrap things up a bit, XQuery allows you to create fully functional prototypes, to test them on your phone with the same constraints as the developers have. And you can just plug it into your final UI. And of course, you have incredibly fun while developing. Damn! Excuse that. There you go. So, oh, one more thing. I promised to demonstrate this. I've been doing a sort of a plugin. I haven't really had time to hook it into my presentation. But somebody asked me to demonstrate this. You can actually, I wrote a plugin which allows you to export from QML directly from GIMP or Photoshop. So if you're interested in that, you can go on gitorius.org, Qt developer, blah, 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 whatever this link says. And you can download it. And I'm just going to show it off because I still have a few minutes running, I think. It's pretty cool. I'm going to show up the GIMP version. I have the same thing running in Photoshop. So if I open, unfortunately, it's set on Norwegian. So I have this awesome example. And this is a layer document. I showed you briefly how you could slice things. But I was thinking, wouldn't it be convenient if you could automatically slice your things directly? So I wrote a quick exporter. It's just a script plugin for the GIMP. I have the exact same thing written for Photoshop. And you can just go in here. I will dump it on my desktop for now. I'll call it my element. And you can see I'm dumping all of these items directly on my desktop. And if we're lucky now, we can open this up in Qt Creator as a, let's see, my element.qml. There it is. That's the raw data dumped directly from GIMP or Photoshop. I go into design mode, and it's pre-sliced. So all of these layers I had in GIMP are exported as QML elements, and the text items are preserved. So that's cool if you have a designer and you don't want to do all the fiddle of converting. So there you go. Thank you. Questions? Can somebody run around with the microphone, please? There you go.
My question is, what will happen if I turn the cell phone to the side?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Let me go and demonstrate what will happen. If I run my application again, and I resize this window, that's what will happen. In fact, I have this running on my phone. Let me cut back to the phone. I hope it's still running. There you go. I go back. Of course, I didn't fix my back button, so it's very hard to press. In fact, it's nearly impossible to press. Let me just restart the app. So this is why it's important to involve the prototype early in the process and actually make those changes. So if I just run this now, and keep in mind, I haven't done anything to adapt for this. I'm just using the defaults. So if I now tilt over my phone, what's happening is that. Because I used anchors, you can see the elements stretch naturally. And of course, this looks a little bit strange. Let me just make it full screen. Now this is the QML viewer on the phone. So if I tilt it over, that's what it looks like. So you can see it just adapts to it. And if you add a number animation on the X and Y and the width and height, you will actually see it smoothly animate. So you can control this yourself. So yeah. Question?
I see all of you guys got Creator 2.1. What about those still working on the pretty old 2.0 release?
The entire code, every code I wrote today was written in 2.0.
Ah, okay.
Everything is, this is the binary I downloaded for sem.com. The only time I used 2.1 was when I showed off my GIMP exporter, because I need to run 2.1 to have the actual visual designer. So this is 2.0. It's the same code that's already out there. It's for you to use. And I use this because the other one has not necessarily been stabilized yet. So everything is 2.1, not 2.0. Yes.
Now my question is, how hard would it be to get a real application from this? Real application, I mean exe file, compiled C++ file.
It's very easy. It's actually, you have to wait for Creator 2.1 though, but we have a wizard. It ships with a wizard, so all you do, you create, actually I can demonstrate that. I'm not going to try to put it on the phone. Yeah? Thank you. It's very hard to see what's going on behind me. So if I go, and now I have to use 2.1. I'll just do a file new project, and I will go and create a Qt Quick application, not a Qt Quick UI. Qt Quick UI is a pure QML file, and to run it, you depend on QML viewer, which is basically just a player, and that's the one I use to demonstrate it on the phone. But if you create a Qt Quick application, you just follow the wizard. Yeah, I have to choose a Qt version. Next, next, next. You see Symbian specific, MyMO specific. You choose the app icon you want your application to have when it gets on the phone. And you keep pressing next a couple of times. It will create a main.qml file. You run it, and there you go. If I actually look at the contents of this thing, you will see it already has a C++ wrapper. So that's a fully working C++ app, but it has bindings to QML, so you can just plug in your QML files as the UI, but everything else is based on C++. So that's it. It's pre-built, and you can just move it directly onto the phone when it's compiled. Yes? Questions?
I guess the footprint for the XML itself is very, very small, but what about the binary part? So if I make a real application out of it, what is the amount of data I need in my RAM?
The amount of data?
Well, the size of the application, roughly.
I'm not sure if I understand entirely. Are you talking about the size of the QML text file?
Well, the text file is
That's
little
nothing.
small.
Yes.
The pings are small too, but if you make this binary out of it, so it's getting some runtime.
Oh, you misunderstood. I didn't make a binary out of it. If you use QML, that's a scripted language. It's going to run text files as your UI. What I did was I created an application wrapper. I created a small C++ main application that basically opens a Qt declarative view to view a QML file. So it basically means you will get a hybrid approach. It will not compile your QML into binaries. That's not what happens. It just means your binary is going to access QML. So you have to keep a clear separation between your UI layer and whatever C++ you have in the bottom. So, yes.
Maybe to answer the question simply, the added size of the executable is rather marginal compared to a Qt application. So if I go with exactly how big a Qt application is, but it sort of answers your question.
Yes. Which part shall I repeat? Yeah, just give the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the increased size of the binary executable on Symbian or Migo platforms is marginal compared to any Qt application. But I don't know exactly how big a Qt application is.
Yeah, just pass the microphone forward.
So this means the XML file is open to everyone.
It's not an XML file, it's QML. That's it's more than distinction,
QML,
because this is human readable and XML is not.
It's human readable, and therefore everyone can change it.
Yes, it means if you write QML code, the UI layer is likely to be exposed. It's the same thing that happens if you write on a web page. Any JavaScript you use on a web page is going to be readable to everyone. If you want to work around that, you can, in theory, just encrypt it as a resource. But it's very hard to have 100% protection. If you want protection for that, you should probably use it in a different layer. For instance, put the file in an inaccessible part of your phone, or do something similar. We're still looking into that question. But really, you can encrypt a resource and use it through a C++ wrapper. Or you can just keep the parts you want to keep secret in your app, you can keep on the C++ side. For instance, app tokens for OAuth, things like that will have that problem. But in general, this is a scriptable language, and you sort of live within the boundaries of a scriptable language. It's supposed to be text and openly read, in a way. So, yes. But we are looking into that. Because you're not the first one asking.
In your demo, you define the model direct in QML. When you go for a C++ app, is it possible to define the model in C++?
It's actually very simple. If I have I can't really show it, but what you do, when you create a QDeclarative view, opens a QML file, you have access to the root context. So you can just, if you have an abstract item model that's full of data, and it has, for instance, the title and image source set on each item, all you do is export that as a QObject property. You set that on the root context, and it will be visible. So, I mean, from the QML side, all that means, let's see if I can just find back my picker. All it means is that when I run my application, there will be an object exposed to QML. And you will just call it in on the C++ side, if you just set the object name to, for example, CPP model, you would, of course, remove this one. And you would just say CPP model. Because any QObject properties you set on the root context object is just accessible to QML like this. You just expose them from the C++ side, and you do the binding on the QML side. So, yes. It's very easy. I don't have a quick and dirty example. There's one behind there.
Is it better to use PNG images instead of SVG images? Because as far as I know, you could use them too.
Is it better to use PNG instead of SVG?
Yes.
Yes. Although SVG images are vector graphics, and their performance characteristics, if they're rendered in real time, depends on how many layers you have. In theory, if you want to do real-time compositing of SVG, you need hardware support to do that. SVG will always be slower than PNG. It's like people have standardized on bitmap images because they're fast. So you can, in theory, use SVG, but they will immediately be rendered as PNG images the moment you put it into the application. So that's done once. You would never want to use, in a real-time mobile interface, you should never really use scalable vector graphics directly. You use it to generate your assets, and then create border images out of them. So you have to go through the slicing process. But yes, question?
Yeah, I've got a simple question. What is the equivalent Qt method of the property anchor?
What is the
Qt method that is equivalent to the anchor property you defined?
Did you get
anchor property?
The anchor property. What's the anchor property?
What's the equivalent Qt method or Qt class that could make it possible to express it in the Qt framework?
Yeah, I still didn't get the question. Maybe you can repeat it if you heard it. AJ? What? Yeah, we'll just take it afterwards. Yes, no problem. Yeah.
How do you get Qt47 onto the N8? Is that the standard? You put your dependency in the profile and then let Smart installer?
It is an excellent question. As I briefly mentioned, the N8 at the moment, it ships with 4.6.3, I think, or 4.6.2. And the problem is the packages we have for 4.7, they won't install in it because it will crash with the system one. Right now, you have to be a good friend of me. The thing is we're still waiting to have an official release of it. So I don't know. I can't give you an exact time. I'm thinking within a couple of months maximum, there will be at least something you can develop on. But I personally cannot give you a perfect answer to that right now. All I can tell you, I have it on my N8, and it works beautifully.
So if you wanted to write a test application using Qt Quick for the N8, you can't test it on the phone at all as a developer yet?
Right now. Next month, it's probably possible. The thing is, like, we already... Yeah, Henrik? You can test it directly on the N900. And I believe other Symbian phones, as far as I know.
You can build it with specific flags. I don't know them offhand, but maybe we can try to do a blog post about it so to communicate it. But basically, you need to build it in such a way that it runs on basically the user part of the storage area.
We'll do a blog post on that as soon as possible. Just keep you posted reading our blogs, and we'll mention it when it comes out. Yeah. There's one over here.
This is probably an easy question, but I was just trying to figure out how to do text input, like line edit.
Yes.
Something like that.
Didn't I demonstrate that when I created the line edit?
Yeah, but I've been trying to do that, and it doesn't seem to be available.
Let's just do that afterwards.
Okay, I just wonder if there's...
In principle, it's what I did.
We will make those videos from these recordings and sessions available shortly after Developer Days, so that you can have a look like what he did in the magic part.
Yeah, that was the magic part. Sorry. So, what's the time? Yeah, sure, just keep shooting. I don't mind. Any other questions?
Yes, hello. For people that aren't very technical, is it possible to make the same prototype with the designer?
To make the same prototype?
Yeah, so without changing the QML itself, but using the designer.
Yes. As I said, this will be released when when Creator 2.1 comes out. I don't know exactly when, but it should be pretty soon now. I can just demonstrate that. If I open, I think I opened this file I created from Photoshop or from the GIMP. You have the designer, it's a visual designer, and if I move things around here, you can create different states. Like in my app, I would make two states. I would make one initial state and one view state. And then in this state, I can just move all the content over. So now you have two states. And now it's easy for me to make a transition between those two. And if I save this, I go back to my QML file. Now this is going to be very unreadable. But you can basically see that the file has now a new state called state 1 that has all these properties set. So you can do a lot of these design things without actually touching the QML directly. But I would recommend, even if you're a non-technical person, I would recommend trying to read a little bit in the QML code because it's actually quite fluent once you get into it. It's very, very fun. I would recommend doing that anyway. Yeah. Anything else? That's it? Okay. Thank you.